So with that, we will move to the 8:15 agenda item for an update regarding the procurement committee. Before we start this, I want to make a couple of comments. First and foremost, I think it is important for us to keep in mind that as much as we are interested in this topic, we do not have any authority or jurisdiction as a finance committee. And so tonight, what I think we're here to do is get an update from our finance director on the status of the committee, for us to have some discussion as a finance committee about any reactions or comments or feedback folks have on that. And then we will turn to some of the folks who've joined us for this evening's meeting, who I suspect may want to make comments. I am going to ask that when you make comments, both that you provide your name, because we have a few places where there's not names on the Zoom, and that you also keep your comments reasonably brief. We don't have a formal time limit here, but we also want to be respectful, and that you also, that we not repeat the same comments. So certainly we welcome people if they have things to add that haven't already been said. We welcome that, and I can speak for myself that I am here to listen. Like I said, we don't have authority here to do anything, to make changes or do anything different, but we certainly want to listen and understand the concerns of our community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Scollins to provide us with the update. And you're on mute.
Sorry about that. You would think after 4 years I would have that mastered. But thank you, Madam Chair. I'll keep this brief, so we'll have more time for questions. But on January 23rd, I appointed the long-serving veteran town committee member and procurement expert, Bob McCarthy, as my designate to be the chair of this very important committee. He brings 30 years of experience in procurement in this town and serving on many committees. So certainly a solid choice in my view. He didn't ask to serve in this position, but he graciously accepted the appointment and has been charged with managing this effort in accordance with the motion passed at the November 20th, 2023 special town meeting. Bob has requested secretarial assistance to accomplish the task, and Human Resources is working on finding someone to fill that role. In short, the assignment of the committee is to draft an RFP, a request for proposal, bid it competitively, and select a vendor to perform the work articulated in the RFP, all in accordance with the state's procurement laws. So that was the charge of what was voted at town meeting, and my role in this as the town's chief procurement officer was to select a chair to manage the committee. And from this point forward, Mr. McCarthy will be the one who will be doing just that in every aspect, not me.
So with that, I will open it up to the committee if folks have questions or that they'd like to raise or comments they want to discuss. Dave?
Thank you, Cindy. So based on public statements Mr. McCarthy made at the special town meeting, he called the article legally unenforceable, urged the town to stop pandering to the disruptive minority and move on. So I guess I'm not sure how a person like this could be in charge to move forward with an audit when they don't really believe in it. For instance, we wouldn't put the opposition in charge of rebuilding the Galvin Middle School or rebuilding St. Gerard's. And that's what we've done in this case. So in my opinion, I feel that this is going to be a giant misappropriation of $200,000. And it's just should be, something needs to be worked out where we use a different designee in town. And I know that our committee doesn't have any ability to change this, but the appointing authority, Mr. Scollins, does have the ability to change this under Mass General Law, Chapter 30D, Section 19. He could rescind the appointment, and what I would suggest is he use a special counsel with a mass procurement certification to oversee the process, and someone who's outside of the county, due to the fact that we have a federal investigation into the investigation, and we don't even know who in the town is under investigation. So with that said, I would suggest that Mr. Scollins, please change the designee.
Would Madam Chair, would you like me to respond? Yes.
Please do. Sorry, I'm muted because I'm getting a lot of feedback.
All right. Would you like me to respond?
Yes, please. Please.
So Dave, I truly respect your opinion, your right to your opinion. We don't share that though. I'm fully aware of public statements that were made by Mr. McCarthy as a private citizen, as many statements were made by many as private citizens on either side of the issue. But that aside, that's those are opinions of a private citizen. Mr. McCarthy's role and the role of all of us as appointed officials here is to operate with integrity, with our charge, with our role. And based on my experience with Mr. McCarthy, I fully believe that he will operate with complete integrity in completing this assignment. I have no reason to believe otherwise. As far as going through choosing a different designee in a process that you described, I appreciate the recommendation, but this was an authority that the town, by vote, granted to the chief procurement officer, who happens to be me at this time. And this, I truly believe, is the best individual who could manage this important committee based on his experience, 30 years, his ability to manage difficult projects. You brought up the Galvin School. What if people with differing views that supported the Galvin School were to manage that project? Well, Mr. McCarthy is a significant player on the school building committee, and I don't know if you watch those meetings, but he has been very critical of the architects, the owner's project manager on the cost, and has been very clear that he is expecting them to work harder at bringing the cost down. So I see him as somebody who's working in the best interest of the taxpayer, but in a collaborative way to bring an important project like that to fruition, just like I believe he will do the exact same thing with this project. I truly do believe that. And again, I didn't make the selection lightly. And again, Bob didn't volunteer for this. I surveyed who was a viable candidate for this, who had the experience, who was willing to do this work, who did not have direct line to the select board or the police department, because I was respecting the statements made by the petitioners that they did not want people with those kinds of connections to head this committee. And that's the primary reason that I removed myself from managing this committee, because I believe, as you all know, I report directly to the entire board and to the town administrator. So my not participating in managing this committee was in deference to the wishes of the petitioners. So again, I have every full faith and confidence that Mr. McCarthy will manage this project well and with distinction. So I have no reservations on the selection.
And one more just brief statement, Cindy, if I may. I reached out to Mr. McCarthy to become citizen at large. He immediately rejected me, said he already had 2 people, wouldn't tell me who they were. It's in the bylaws that people who are selected need to be filed with the town clerk immediately. He said he would release them whenever he wanted. That's inappropriate to do. And he's not a private citizen. He works as a special employee for the town.
I can't speak to how Bob is going to manage the selection process. What I do know is that he has to manage it in accordance with the way the article was voted. And that is exactly what he's going to do.
So I want to go next to Juliana. You has your hand raised.
Just have 2 quick questions. First one being, do you, Randy, stay involved on some level in terms of oversight and moving the process forward, or is it now completely out of your hands?
It is very much out of my hands. I am not planning to oversee the work of the committee. The chair would do that. The chair is fully capable of doing that. I'm not going to meddle with that. I want to keep arm's length from that whole process for all the reasons I just stated. There's really no reason for me to be involved at this point, other than in a very ministerial way, which would be to help him to obtain some secretarial assistance through human resources, who's agreed to find somebody for him. And then ultimately, after the committee has completed their work without my involvement, developing the request for proposal agreed upon by the committee, the role that I would have, if any, and only if asked by Mr. McCarthy, would be to publish the RFP, meaning put it out on all the usual sites that it would go, and ensure that it gets posted in accordance with Chapter 30B procurement laws. But I will have no material involvement at all in this work.
So then you may not have information about my second question, which is, do you know if there is an intended cap on the amount that's going to be spent on an assistant? I think part of the concern is there's a limited pot that's been allocated to this. Do you know if there is an intention?
That's a multi-part question. So first off, I think I've seen in some communiques that some are of the opinion that any administrative costs associated with this project shouldn't be within the $200,000 that was funded. That is not the way the article reads. The entire project will be funded with the $200,000, including the administrative costs, which should be relatively de minimis, given that it's hourly rate for secretarial services and any mailings and copying and things like that that would happen. And so as far as the net amount, which will be the overwhelming majority of what was appropriated, we'll see what the procurement process brings. But based on my experience, I think that amount is well more than sufficient to hire an extremely well qualified consultant to do this work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rita, I do see your hand. I'm going to go to the committee first to see whether we have any other comments from committee members, and then we will go to members of the public. Randy, I will ask a question. One of the, then I'll go to Amelia. One of the things that I have heard, and I think this relates to Kristen's question, was that there was also a consulting fee involved for Mr. McCarthy, and I'd ask you to maybe address that.
That is untrue. This is an unpaid assignment, just like all of Mr. McCarthy's volunteer work on all the various boards and committees that he served on.
Thank you. Amelia?
Thanks, Cindy, and Randy. Obviously, this is a difficult situation to oversee because the majority of people in town have opinions. And, I think the article is the roadmap and the safety net, because it is entrenched in the article that certain things need to be done. And I think, the public will also be able to follow this process, attend meetings going forward. These are open meetings. And, despite someone might have an opinion one way or the other, that open process can guarantee, or at least better ensure, that, the spirit and letter of that article is implemented. And in the end, it will lead to an independent audit or being procured, which will then provide a report that will be public and be reported at a future town meeting. And so I think there's a lot of, even though, there's lots of concerns, and I respect a lot of the concerns, there's a lot of opportunities here for transparency, a lot of opportunities for participation or involvement. And so I think that, we do have to understand it's a really difficult situation, and there's always going to be some, concerns as we go through the process. But I think that the town meeting sponsored a process and an appropriation to try to, bring our community back together by trying to better, see what may or may not need some addressing. And so, I think we need to have a little bit of faith and confidence in a process that the people of the town, through town meeting, the voters, supported. And, that's a process, we can, as a community, continue to monitor as we go.
Thank you for your comments, Emilio. I just wanted to highlight one particular aspect of what you said, and that is that this entire committee process will be public. These will be public meetings. I'd be surprised if they weren't broadcast meetings. I'm hoping that they will be. So certainly, in my view, that's a true check and balance on how this is going to unfold, where any interested party in the community, who has concerns or is interested in how this is going to unfold, is going to be able to fully observe, either live at the meeting or watching on cable and commenting, around that. So again, another reason why I am highly confident that in that fishbowl of a process, that we will get a result that the community is looking for.
One of the things that I'll just say is, having had a chance to talk to you, Randy, and hearing you talk through your decision, how you got to this decision, was certainly helpful. I think one of the things we talked about a lot in the preparation for the special town meeting was some of the issues around perception. And I think, I think that, it may turn out that Mr. McCarthy does a great job and it all goes well. I think it's really hard for many of us to get beyond his very sort of clear and direct message about how he felt about all of this. And so I think that's a hard one to get beyond. When and I had conversations with him outside of town meeting, bump into him somewhere, and and so I think that for the general public, for those who've been intimately involved in all of this, I think that's feels like a really big lift and a big ask to kind of get beyond that. I think the other lesson learned for me, I'm going to be perfectly frank, is I think we have a number of the petitioners here with us this evening. We all worked really hard to try to figure out how to get all of this through. I certainly think I have some lessons learned for me about the impact that language has. You know, things like when we say to be selected by the petitioners, and the reality is there were 300 of them. How does that work? And I don't think we ever really thought that through and discussed it in terms of, to be, and I don't have the language right in front of me, but it's select nominated. But when you have three, the language says by the petitioners, and the petitioners are all those people who signed the petition for the town meeting. And so I certainly, and I'm sorry because I'm like, yeah, why didn't I think of that when we were back there? I think it also represents the challenges of having a large ad hoc group that has done meaningful and important work in the community, but yet is ad hoc in many ways and doesn't have, clear, defined leadership, if you will, or structure. And maybe it does, and I'm just not aware of that, and I love to be educated on that. But I guess, as I kind of look at some of this and I try to reflect on some of it, I'm kind of like, there's definitely some lessons learned here for future work. And I see some of the challenges that we face with this going forward, because the way the language reads is nominated by the petitioners. And I hear that being interpreted very clearly, but I don't know what else you would do. When you have 300 petitioners, what do you do to get those nominations? I think that those are real and legitimate issues that need to be considered. So I just sort of be very honest here and say I have a lot of lessons learned through this process that I hope I will take into future work. Other committee comments before we turn it over to some some of our voters, members of our community. Okay, hearing none. Rita, could you just introduce yourself and then?
Yes.
No address. No address.
Yeah, Rita Lombardi, no address. I'm a Canton resident. And my question is to Mr. Scollins. And I do have a couple of questions. So I hope, I was with Kathleen and, and like you said, Mr. Thomas, is that, an enormous effort went into this. The citizens pulled this off and spent enormous effort, myself included, to rally citizens. We got over 2,000 people to a special town meeting, and 903 brave people raised their hand in a hostile environment where there was open bullying for people to raise their hand for this audit. They wanted an independent audit. And I guess my first question is that the petitioners made it very clear that they did not want someone who was affiliated with the police department or that was an embedded town employee, because they wanted someone who could be objective. And in your announcement letter, Mr. Scollins, you proudly said that Bob sat on the building renovations committee for 30 years. Well, our police chiefs have sat on that and they still sit on that. So Bob has sat side by side with the police chiefs of this town for at least 20 years. And he is an embedded town employee. So my question to you, Mr. Scollins, is how do you reconcile that when the voters made it clear that they did not want that type of individual? How do you reconcile that?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Lombardi. That was a big part of the challenge of trying to select the most appropriate person with the experience to manage a procurement like this. I would challenge anybody here to find somebody in the community that is a town employee that didn't have an opinion one way or the other. No opinion is right or wrong, but that's the challenge here, is that everybody's got an opinion. Everybody,
If I
myself
could request,
included.
if I
So,
could
so can I
respond.
finish? Can
Sure.
I finish? Thank you. So that indeed, as the Madam Chair stated, that was the biggest challenge, was to find somebody who I believe possessed the integrity to work beyond any personal opinion that they had. And having worked with Bob, and I think most of us here on this committee in town government, we work side by side with members of every department: police, fire, DPW, select board office, clerk's office. So it's a needle in a haystack to find somebody who has no opinion and has zero affiliation. In affiliation, you're drawing a pretty gray line, but just because they sit on a committee with somebody from another department, that then biases them or boxes them out. I thought through all that, and it was just an unreconcilable issue to land on the quote perfect, from a perception basis, perfect individual to head this committee. So that's where I had to focus on the underlying integrity and experience of the individual. And at the end of the day, I selected Bob because I believe he possessed all of those qualities, and that I believed he will show us that he can satisfy the intent of this article to everybody's satisfaction.
If I may,
So read it out. I'm mindful that, so if you have an additional question, and then I want to go to Kathleen.
okay, great. So if I may, people who sit on committees, the committees are working on projects. Would you not agree, Mr. Scollins? Okay, so
Committees work on many things.
right, but this is a project. Sourcing vendors, working on an RFP, it's a project, right? So I have 30 years experience in the corporate world in project leadership, and never, ever would a business organization elect someone or select someone to spearhead a committee or even sit on a committee if they did not believe in the project's objectives. And Bob clearly does not believe in the objectives, and that is to do an independent audit. He made that very clear that he does not believe in this. And so you wouldn't want somebody who doesn't have an opinion. You want somebody who believes in the cause. Just like if you had a football team, you wouldn't put a quarterback in that doesn't want to play football. You want somebody who's going to lead the team. And Bob, in integrity. So, you want somebody who believes in the cause. Bob does not believe in the cause. So that in itself tells me it's a setup for failure. Because it just is. Look, any project management, you would never, ever do that. And in terms of integrity, the warrant articles said that 2 members would be nominated by the petitioners and 2 community members at large would be nominated too and selected by the chief procurement officer or his designee. As soon as Bob was elected, he already had 2 people. He didn't even go through a process. And in your letter, so that speaks to integrity to me, that we got a problem here because he's not even following the article. And in terms of that statement, it said in your announcement letter, you also put that it would form, the petitioners now were subject to a democratic and transparent process. I'm not sure where you saw that language in the article that was voted on. So can you explain to us where that language came from?
So you made a lot of points there, Ms. Lombardi. So if I could address them all,
Oh, that'd be
including that
awesome.
last one. Excellent. So after Mr. McCarthy had agreed to be appointed to the committee, the first thing that I did, which is what I explained to anyone who expressed an interest in the committee to me, you all received the exact same response from me on what would happen when my designee was selected, that I would turn over all of the statements of interest that I had received to the designee for that person's consideration for selection of or nomination of 2 citizen at large members. So Mr. McCarthy never stated to me that he had already determined who was going to be on the committee. His starting point was all of the documentation that I provided to him. So I don't know where he is in the process, because that is not my concern at this point, because I trust that he's going to follow the language in the article, which is that people have nominated themselves. They're suggesting that they want to be on the committee. The citizen at large folks have suggested they want to be on the committee. Anybody can do that. Anybody can nominate somebody to be a citizen at large on the committee to Mr. McCarthy. Mr. McCarthy can nominate folks. Any one of you could nominate somebody. And it is the chair's authority under this article to select anyone who is, quote, nominated to be the citizen at large if the chair believes that those folks have the best experience to be successful with this committee. So I'm not aware of any pre-decisions that Mr. McCarthy made. He never shared anything like that with me. I gave him everything that I had received, and he was off from there. And again, as far as your point about integrity, I guess the point that I made earlier this evening about any individual is entitled to put forward their opinion, as a private citizen. Everybody on this Zoom and everybody in the town does that. Mr. McCarthy's entitled to do that. But once they are in their public role, which he wasn't in a public role when he was standing at town meeting floor making his comments as a citizen, but once he's in the public role, like all of us in public roles, we are held to a higher standard to be professional and conduct ourselves with integrity. And Mr. McCarthy is somebody who exemplifies that. With regards to how I interpreted that the petitioners, the 2 members of the committee to be selected by the petitioners, would be through a democratic process. Well, if you read the plain language, which you just did, it's pretty clear that the petitioners, meaning all of the folks who signed the petition, need to be engaged to nominate 2 people to be on the committee. So how do you do that with hundreds of people who are associated with that petition? You have to go through a nomination process. The petitioners have to be asked, who do you want to be on the committee? And in essence, a vote. That's democracy. And so that's a pretty clear line between the language in the article and how it actually plays out.
But you inserted language that wasn't there. And people came to Kathleen and I and nominated us, the petitioners, and asked us to be on the committee. They not only asked us to be on the committee, they want us to run for select board. That's how much faith they have in us. So
that's fantastic. So I'm expecting that if that is indeed the case, then that would ultimately be the result of the nominating process that needs to be conducted for the petitioners.
So you're saying that your process was, and you announced in the paper for people to email you with interest, and we spoke to the petitioners and the petitioners came to us. So why do we need to go through an expense? If you want signatures, we're happy to get those for you. We'll just take the list of the petitioners and we'll go door to door to get them. That way you don't have to pay a secretary to do a mailing and letters. Not that I agree with what you're saying, but if you want signatures, we'll get them for you.
It's not your process to run. It's the chair's process to run.
And so we
he's
now have
running the
elections.
process. He's running the process as it is laid out in the article. You can differ with what that language means, and I respect your right to differ on that. But I see it very differently than you do.
So you inserted language into the article that you felt was appropriate, and then you delegated it to Bob, and now you have hands off. Is that what you're telling me?
I did not insert language into
Yes,
the
you
article.
did.
The article
Yes,
was
you
voted by
did.
town meeting.
I'm
Yes.
gonna pause here, Rita, please. We're not
Okay.
here to argue. I really want to provide an opportunity for listening. I think there may be differences of opinion this evening about this. I'd like to actually, I know Kathleen's had her hand up. I'd like to have an opportunity from her, but this is not, I think it's important for people to be able to express their concerns, put those issues on the table. But I don't think, I'm hoping that everyone here is listening. I think that is the goal for this evening. We're not gonna have an argument. So
I
Kathleen,
appreciate that, and I'm sorry.
that's okay, no problem. We're all here for good cause, right? We all, I think for me, I sort of sit here and say, at least I can speak for myself, that there are honorable intentions here. We all want this to come out well. This is important to our community. It's important for hopefully our community to move forward. It's also important because we're going to spend taxpayers' money, and it has to happen and be done right and have a productive process that comes out on the other end. So I think, I'd like to think that we all have a common goal. We may not agree about how we get there, and I'm not inserting my opinion here in it as much as trying to reflect what I hear. Kathleen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kathleen Howley, Canton resident. I was the lead petitioner. I started the petition. We did have a structure. You don't have a project that ends up with over 1,700 people showing up for a town meeting when 300, before this would have been great, without having a structure. So we certainly did have a structure. I'd be glad to tell you all about it, maybe not in this venue, but anybody who would like to know about our structure. We had a core group of people who worked very hard, and you know what? We're not activists, we're moms. So we're not thinking like, we don't, we have idle hours that we need to fill. Maybe we'll take up a hobby or, no, we're concerned about the safety of people in town, and particularly the town that we're raising our children in. So that's where we're coming from. I will say that I do appreciate very much Randy acknowledging his conflicts, which anybody can see that if I am being paid by somebody and that's helping me pay my mortgage, then what they have to say is going to be pretty darn important. And I would want to make them happy. And we all understand that because we all have mortgages and we all have paychecks. I do appreciate you acknowledging that, Randy. I will
I don't
say though
understand
that what don't you
the
understand?
point is lost on me.
Understand.
The point is lost on me. This acknowledgement of conflicts.
saying
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to tell you before you say that I agree with that. I don't understand what you're saying.
You acknowledged when you were speaking that you had a conflict because you report directly to the select board.
I
Did I
did,
hear that?
yes.
Yes.
Yes, but you just
That's
said
what I'm
Mr.
talking about.
McCarthy, I believe.
No, she said
No,
you.
I'm talking about you, Randy.
Okay.
And you then said to solve that conflict, you picked Mr. McCarthy, and that was a way to address that conflict. But when you picked Mr. McCarthy, you picked the person that would make our select board, who were adamantly opposed to this. We all saw them like John standing in rage after, the vote was counted. You pick the person that would make them the most happy, because you pick the person who spoke the most vehemently against this. And not, yes, we all get to have our views as private citizens. And certainly the people who worked to have the police audit are in favor of the police audit. But we usually do appoint people to committees who are in favor of the goal of that committee. So I would say that picking Mr. McCarthy, I don't think is a solution to that conflict. In fact, I would say it made it worse. I would also add that the number 200,000, I would hope that you would think this of us, that we don't just show up at the select board meetings and like wing it. We know, we research, we come informed, and that's how we approach this. And we got the $200,000, not out of picking it out of the air. We called the national, the highly respected companies, one of us, that was her sole task was to research this. I was on Zoom calls. And that's about what it costs to get a top-notch firm to do an independent audit, a thorough audit for a police department that has never had that done before. So that adds to the cost. So that is what we found in our research would be what it would cost to have a top-notch, highly respected firm that the taxpayers, that had the reputation that the taxpayers would see those results and be able to have confidence in it. Now, there's no mention, the $200,000 was to hire the independent auditor. There's no mention of secretarial. I mean, we all read English, so I'm saying, I'm not even sure you can say this is my opinion. It's a matter of fact that in the article, it talks about using that money to hire an auditor. So that appropriation is not mentioned at all. I'd also mention that you've come up with this election, and the town is having a very tightly compressed election cycle right now. That's how we do our town elections. It's a very short cycle. And you're throwing out an election now, and we don't have secretaries running elections in Canton. We don't do that. That's not an election. So I really would question that as well. And this idea of picking someone who would bring us together, you picked the person who would drive us. You could not have picked a person who would make the petitioners more unhappy. It would not be possible. So you have picked a person who has had the opposite effect of what you say you wanted to do. And when you spoke to the Canton Citizen in the November, I think it was November 30th article, and I was very happy to see. Sorry.
23rd.
What? Okay. For some reason, I thought it was on. Was that when it came out? Regardless, there was no mention of an election. I was at the FinCom meeting when they were coming up with the wording, and I mean, my understanding is the core group of petitioners would put forth 2 names, and
They will.
can I just point out though, you're interrupting me a lot.
I'm sorry, please proceed.
Thank you. So when this amendment was, and I watched the FinCom, I was very impressed with the diligent efforts and the sincerity of FinCom putting this together. But I don't think, it never occurred to me that FinCom was saying, let's have an election. I assumed that FinCom was going to leave it up to the petitioners, to that core group that got the signatures and brought this effort, to fruition. So there's been a lot that I think has been added. And I just want to once again say, I almost want to say congratulations. You have picked the one person that will drive that will drive this town the most apart. I mean, that's like a superlative. You could not have picked someone, because this was a person at the special town meeting who denounced it the most vehemently and the most angrily, that this was illegal. And it was, these disruptive people, I forget, those weren't his exact words. Like, no, we're moms who our children are growing up in this town. And we're taxpayers who are happy to pay the more than $6 million a year, so happy to do that. We just want to make sure our money is being well spent. And for that, we were vilified. So I think that you've really picked the worst person. If you wanted to pick somebody, if you wanted to drive the town apart, you picked the best person. I will say that. And with that, I'll yield the floor.
So next, I'd actually like to go to Karen, when I think our members would like to comment.
Thanks, Cindy. I just had a question. So the way that the article was written and the motion was written back at special town meeting, Randy, as the chief procurement officer, was going to lead this committee and be the person who picked the 3 to 5 members with relevant experience in procurements, et cetera. So I guess my question to you, Randy, is what changed from the time when that was written and we were discussing this until you decided to pick a designee for yourself? I don't understand what changed from one point to the other for you to decide to do that.
Sure. I don't think I could have been any clearer, particularly in this discussion tonight and at the FinCom meetings, is that I made that decision out of respect for the petitioners. They clearly said they didn't want people directly aligned with the select board and the police and the select board and the police. I am directly reporting into the select board. So that was out of respect for the petitioners that I did not want to tread on that.
Okay, thank you.
Dave?
Thank you, Cindy. So 2 quick points. How do you have an election for people with procurement experience, 300 or so people, where some people may not even have procurement experience? And second point is, was that letter approved by the Inspector General for the designee appointment prior to you releasing the article in the Citizen?
To your last point, Dave, there's no Inspector General requirement to approve what the Chief Procurement Officer was authorized to do in that in that motion. I'm sorry, what was the first part of your question again, Dave?
It's in regard to the procurement experience and how you're going to pick those people. But in regard to Chapter 30B laws, I believe there is the designee has to be the appointment letter has to be sent over to the Inspector General.
That's an procurement. Primarily, that has to do with the procurement official of the town, which I'm clearly on record with the state as the chief procurement official with the town. But to your point about the nominating process for the petitioners to put forward 2 people for the to the committee, it's a nominating process, and nominating process is to suggest someone for a position. And so the petitioners can nominate who they see fit to the individual who is then authorized to select from who is nominated. And so the chair is in the position to evaluate the nominations to see if they, comply with the requirements or not, and has the discretion to select potentially the top 2 that get put forward by the petitioners that may or may not have all of the requisite procurement experience. So again, it's it's not a law.
That sounded like a change from a vote to the chair is going to assign the petitioners. It's constantly an evolving fluid situation we have here. It doesn't seem black or white the way it should be.
Well, that's not, the article was written in a certain way, and that's what frames the process.
So I'm gonna go next to Tim McKenna, and then unless I want to add additional comments only if they bring in some new information. Not necessarily, I don't want to cut off discussion, but we're approaching 10 o'clock. And as I said, we're here this evening to listen, to understand the concerns, but the Finance Committee is not in a position to act or do something different. So I really, we want to hear, we want to listen. I think Randy wants to hear and listen. But I want to also be mindful of the role of the Finance Committee here. Tim?
Yeah, thanks, Cindy. And I appreciate everything I'm hearing tonight. And, I'm also conscious of the fact that it's almost 10 o'clock, so I'll try to keep this brief. But I think I just have a couple of comments, and then I think a question for Randy. I don't know. I know of Mr. McCarthy. I haven't worked, kind of directly with him or closely with him. But I guess I do have faith in Randy that he will pick somebody that will not, I'm not concerned that he believe in a particular cause or want to make any particular group happy, but that what he'll want to do is run a procurement process that will, select a quality outside consultant that will conduct a review of the Canton Police Department, which I think is what everyone is looking for. And I guess my question to Randy is, I think the underlying concern here is that, maybe Mr. McCarthy is going to, run this process in such a way that, he ends up saying, I couldn't find anybody. We couldn't complete the procurement process, and we couldn't select a consultant, or is going to select a consultant that's somehow unacceptable and won't do a quality job. So, I certainly hope that that's not the process, and I trust, what Randy has seen in Mr. McCarthy, that is not, where we're headed. But I guess my question for Randy, and this will play out in public. So I guess what would be the recourse if people start to feel that the process isn't being run, in a quality way, or getting to the selection of a consultant? What would be the recourse at that point?
Thank you for the question, Tim, in the comments. I guess if that scenario were to play out, which I highly doubt it will, in the negative, I guess the recourse would be, for something like this, what it always is in a community, is to bring forward this process again, bring forward this article again, get another vote, write the article differently. So it's handled differently than what was voted at town meeting. I fully don't expect that to happen, but given that this was a vote of town meeting in a very structured motion, I think if people ultimately are unsatisfied with the way it unfolds, they could do it again. I certainly hope that doesn't happen, because I have every faith that it won't, but I believe that's the recourse.
So I want to make two comments, and we'll go to Rita, and then we'll wrap up for this evening. I first want to acknowledge, Kathleen, I am aware that there was a core group of folks who worked very hard. And when I said that there wasn't, it was just, it's not a formal group that has an elected chair and a vice chair. And, I think I was referring more to the formal kind of structure. So I don't think anybody could not be aware that there were many people behind the scenes and a core group who were working on this. The second, and I'm not saying that there's a blank check by any means, but I think that certainly if the procurement committee goes out to bid on this and the amount that is available to spend on this search is not adequate, we do have a finance committee. And that would be an appropriate issue for the committee to bring forward to the finance committee for discussion. This would not be the first time that a bid happened that ended up in some way outside of an initial appropriation. I mean, we don't, and Randy, if I'm kind of stepping out of my lane here, you could rein me in. But,
No, I completely
we
agree
have,
with your points, Madam Chair. I completely agree with the points you're making.
we have reserve fund, for example, and while this isn't the same as HVAC for the library or other kinds of things like that, I would want to make sure that the petitioners and anyone involved in this would know that we need to make sure we get the bid. I think it was specifically intended that this not be the lowest bidder, that it be the bidder who is most qualified, and so if that becomes an issue, I think we certainly would hope to hear from this committee, and that is within our purview. So with that, Rita, some final comments.
Yes, I just have, so Bob is the person that you designated, and even though you designated him, the outcome still sits on you. So the outcome of this will be a reflection of you, whether he does a great job or not a great job, because that's just what leaders do. And Bob, I would expect is going to pick two like-minded people from whoever he can choose from. And so when we have the chair and two people from the community at large who have been opposed to this audit, and then you have two petitioners who were supportive of it, that's an imbalance right there. That's a 60%, that's an imbalance. And so how do you expect there to be productive conversations and discussions if it is that imbalanced of a committee?
Thank you for the questions, Ms. Lombardi. I would say to your main point about, quote, committee members who may be perceived to be opposed to the audit, that's not an option. This project has to go forward. The vendor has to be selected. The work has to be done. So that has to happen. And that has to be done through collegiality of the committee. So I don't expect, just because there may be people who bring in different personal opinions to the committee, that it's going to result in there will be no vendor selected and there will be no professional vendor conducting what the community is expecting to be done. I fully expect it to be done. So I don't agree with that premise at all.
Well, there may be a difference.
Rita, I'm going to take one more comment from Tom Birmingham, who's raised his hand, and we haven't had an opportunity to speak from him. And then I am going to close out discussion on this for this evening. There you are, Tom. You moved on my screen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Finance Committee, for the opportunity to speak tonight and to hear out this issue. Thank you, Mr. Scollins, for doing your best to answer these questions under difficult circumstances. I know it's late, but as someone who worked very hard to try to ensure success in this process, I'll express my disappointment right now of how things are going. And in particular, one of the things I'm hoping to see come out of this is an improved accountability, transparency, and trust. And it feels to me like we're going in a different direction. And Mr. Scollins, I sure hope you're right. Because right now this is challenging, and what's adding fuel to the fire is, I'm going to throw another question in there, or another key word in there, is fairness. The addition of this transparent democratic process for the petitioners, as you have identified in your ideas and your words is implied, in my opinion, in the motion or the article that was approved. There's no mention of that. If you look at the words that you're referring to be nominated by the petitioners, okay, you've gone to that next level. So it's very confusing to me what that process would look like. So my question to you is, have you spoken to the town clerk on what this democratic process would actually look like and how that would happen?
The town clerk has no role in this process. But when you say there's, Tom, and I respect your opinion and I respect where you stand on all of this. But when you say there's no mention of certain aspects of how this process needs to be run, you can say that about the entire article as it relates to what the ultimate objective is. There's very little meat on the bone about what ultimately should be in this request for proposal. There's some very high level points. They're important points, but they lack an incredible amount of specificity, which is what the work of this committee will do. So you will not be able to say at the end of this process that, wait a minute, this RFP was developed and it's reflecting things that weren't in the article or the motion. But that's exactly what's going to happen, because what this committee has to work with what was in the article and in the motion, is very limited. And that was stated in the Finance Committee meetings, is that the Finance Committee was put in a very difficult position to try to interpret and put something forward that would be positive, that was asked for. They did the best they could with the limited language that they were given. And so that translates out into how this request for proposal is going to be developed. There's going to be many things in there, I'm sure. I'm not going to be part of it, but that are not stated at all in the article of the motion. So again, so there's a level of understanding that's required as to, well, what was the intent? And the best that the committee can do is look at the motion that was passed to come up with their best interpretation of what the intent was. And that will result in other things that are nowhere in the article or the motion.
Tom?
Madam Chair, may I follow up, please? What you just responded to, Mr. Scollins, didn't answer my question with all due respect, and that is the democratic process that you put in your appointment letter. It's not clear to me exactly what that means. And so I understand there's a lot of work that's going to be needed to be done on the scope. And I'd like to address that real quickly if I could as well. But the democratic process, if the town clerk's not involved, and it doesn't apply to the designees process, it feels unfair and unclear. And I think that we need some clarification on how that's going to happen. Ms. Lombardi suggested we don't need that. You're pushing back. I guess at the end of the day, it's going to be Mr. McCarthy's decision.
It is, but I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, Tom, but I would like to respond to what you said.
Sure.
So within the language of the motion, I believe the word nominate is in there.
Mm-hmm.
Nominate is a democratic principle. Individuals are nominated for positions. The country is going through a nomination process in every state. So that language is democratic language. And that is the framework of what was passed in that motion, is to conduct a nominating process. That is a democratic process. So again, I would just restate what I said before, which is, if we can only use the exact words that are in the motion, and not try to understand intent, this process won't go anywhere. And that's not going to serve anybody well. So I am firmly convinced that nominate implies a democratic process.
So, Tom, one more comment, and then we are going to take a join for the.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There is a language to nominate also that applies to the community at large members that doesn't seem to be articulated, that the same process is going to apply to the at large members as the petitioners members. That's the fairness issue that I'm struggling with. Madam Chair, may I just close on a request perhaps to whoever, if Mr. McCarthy's listening, I would like, and I've recommended to you, Mr. Scollins, in a 10-page memorandum that I wrote to you on my suggestions of how to proceed. I would strongly ask that Mr. McCarthy consider establishing selection criteria that's very clear, and we can point to that. If that criteria is not followed as part of the selection of this awarded contract to a consultant, if we don't do that, we're going to end up right back here, A. And B, I would also add, when the scoping of this contract is developed, that criteria also be established for that clarifies and expands on, and the committee agrees to what the terms are that are, as you noted, pretty thin in specificity, as mentioned in the article, related to administrative policy, procedures, and compliance review. That I think we really need to establish some criteria before we go down any further decision making. Thank you.
I agree with you, Tom, and that is the role of the committee to do that. They're going to have to flesh this out so that it ultimately reflects the will of the vote as reflected in the article. And that's my expectation of exactly how this will play out.
Kathleen, one more comment, but I ask you to be very brief, and then we are going
promise you that. I appreciate it, and I do promise to be 2 sentences, I think. The 3 no, what I anticipate will be 3 no votes on the committee can limit the scope to Tuesdays and Thursdays. I mean, I'm exaggerating to make a point. However, they can limit it however they want, and they can also limit what ends up in the report in ways we may not see in an open meeting. Thank you. I appreciate you allowing me to have one more. It's not just choosing the auditor. It's other ways, the scope and what's published.
It's sad to me of the presumptions that are being made here. Not even allowing a committee that's yet to be formed to start their work. So that's disappointing to me. I'm sorry I had to say that, but that's how I feel.
I feel very disappointed as well.
Kathleen, I think we've spent an hour,
Thank you.
more than an hour on this discussion. We really wanted to provide an opportunity, but I am going to bring this discussion to an end. And ask I just want to say thank you to everyone. I know it's not easy to come out here and bring forth your concerns and your perspectives. I really value that. I think the committee does. We're all here listening. And I thank you for taking that time. It matters. With that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Randy, can you do the roll call for us?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ruki,
Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Tim,
Aye.
Karen,
Aye.
Dan,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Emilio,
Aye.
and Cindy.
Aye. Thank you,
Madam Chair,
everyone. Don't forget your homework to review the bylaw between now and the next meeting. So, we'll look forward to seeing everyone in a week. Thank you very much, everyone.
Recording stopped.